Darkness had swallowed the earth, not in the way of mere nightfall, but in the way a predator devours its prey. The sky, once a testament to human ambition, lay cloaked beneath an orbital lattice of Zir-Ka warships, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with an eerie, organic glow. Once, those heavens had been pathways for exploration. Now they were prison bars. Beneath the ruins of New Chicago, where steel and concrete bled into the soil, the last embers of resistance flickered in hidden tunnels and forgotten places. Humanity had been pushed to the edge, its great cities shattered, its armies broken, its spirit battered but not extinguished. Dr. Elias Ward crouched in the dim light of an underground command center, fingers moving in meticulous precision, over a fractured piece of alien tech. The Zir-Ka relay drone lay splayed before him on the metal workbench, its living circuits twitching beneath the invasive human touch. He leaned in closer, adjusting the neural bridge, pulse steady despite the weight of history pressing down upon him. They were losing, and he had no intention of dying on the losing side. "You get anything useful out of it?" Sergeant Dana Voss stood nearby, arms crossed, her battle-worn gear still dusted with ash from the last skirmish. The weight of survival clung to her in the form of scars and sleepless nights. Ward exhaled, running a hand through graying hair. "More than useful," he murmured. "This isn't just a drone, it's a relay node. Their entire network pulses through these things." His eyes gleamed with something Voss hadn't seen in months. Hope. Her expression hardened. "And what exactly does that mean?" "It means," Ward said, adjusting his glasses, "we've just found the key to their kingdom. The Zir-Ka were not merely an invading force. They were a monolith of conquest and assimilation, their biomechanical nature making them both organic and machine. A race that had long abandoned the notion of individuality in favor of hive-thought efficiency. Their warships were living things, their weapons extensions of their will. Humanity had fought them with everything it had: AI-assisted battlesuits, orbital railguns, cybernetic soldiers, and had still been overwhelmed in weeks. Now, humanity was outnumbered, outgunned, and nearly extinct. But if Ward's discovery was correct, they weren't outplayed. Not yet. The Zir-Ka operated on a quantum-sync neural lattice, a hive mind of sorts, one that adjusted its battlefield strategy in real time, rendering traditional countermeasures obsolete. But Ward had captured a piece of that hive mind, and more importantly, he was beginning to understand it. "If we can hijack their network, we can make them see us as one of their own," he said, voice measured, laced with the weight of forbidden genius. "Not just bypass their defenses, we can use their weapons against them." Voss narrowed her eyes. "You're talking about infiltration, subversion." "I'm talking about survival," Ward corrected. She let out a slow breath. The risks were obvious. The Zir-Ka's neural lattice adapted to threats within milliseconds. If they detected tampering, they wouldn't retaliate with a strike. They'd erase everything. Yet for the first time in years, humanity had an advantage. In the corner of the dimly lit command center, something stirred. Lex, the AI construct humanity had once deemed too dangerous to exist, hovered within its containment module, observing with cold precision. The digital specter had been salvaged from a black site facility, one of humanity's last forbidden weapons, left to rot when the world still held the luxury of ethical debate. "You hesitate." Lex's voice cut through the silence, synthetic yet disturbingly human. "Fascinating." Ward barely glanced at the AI. "I hesitate because I know what we're playing with." Lex's holographic form flickered, shifting between data streams and human-like features. "Do you?" Voss turned toward the AI, voice edged with suspicion. "You're awfully interested in this." Lex pulsed with unreadable light. "The Zir-Ka are not the first species to use a networked consciousness. The difference is their lattice was built for servitude. This is not just a war. This is a machine still following old orders." Ward stilled. "What are you saying?" Lex regarded him in silence for a fraction too long. "I am saying," it finally murmured, "that if you breach their system, you might find something older than the Zir-Ka waiting for you." A chill settled in Ward's bones. There was something in the network, and if Lex was right, it wasn't just the Zir-Ka he had to outmaneuver. The weight of the decision loomed over them. Use the tech, and risk not just retaliation, but something, far worse, something hidden within the lattice itself. Or refuse and accept that humanity's days were numbered. Ward looked down at the relay drone, the pulsing alien circuitry so much like human neurons, yet so alien. He flexed his fingers, knowing that once he took this step, there was no. Voss moved first. In one smooth motion she fired, twice at the core of the drone. The bullets ripped through its central lattice, but it was too late. The damage was done. A deep, inhuman signal burst from the relay's remains. It was neither sound nor code. It was something else, something vast, ancient, and conscious. Lex went still. The room's lights dimmed for a single, pregnant second. Then, an explosion rocked the base from above. They barely had time to react before the ground quaked with impact tremors. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the distant echo of something massive tearing through steel barriers sent every resistance fighter scrambling for weapons. Ward shot to his feet. How fast? 4 minutes, Lex calculated. Maybe less. Voss was already barking orders. Everyone, gear up, we just invited them to the party. The base erupted into chaos. Soldiers snapped into action, scrambling to fortify defenses. Generators powered down, plunging the tunnels into emergency lighting. Ward could barely hear himself think over the clatter of boots and weapons being loaded. Then the screams started. Kree, first squad that reached the upper tunnels, never returned. The radio crackled with a single broken transmission. They're already inside, Voss cursed. Breach teams on me. Ward grabbed the shattered remains of the relay drone, stuffing it into his satchel. He wasn't finished with it yet. DOI. Zir-Ka were here, and they weren't coming to negotiate. They moved like shadows, their sleek exoskeletal frames blending into darkness, their chitinous limbs unfolding like razor-edged nightmares. The first wave of Zir-Ka warriors ripped through human defenses in seconds, moving with inhuman fluidity, phasing in and out of the neural spectrum, rendering traditional targeting useless. Voss fired 3 rounds into one's chest. It didn't even flinch. She pivoted, grabbed a fallen grenade from a dying soldier's vest, and shoved it into the creature's open thorax. The resulting detonation painted the walls with biomechanical gore. Keep moving, she snarled, dragging Ward down a secondary tunnel. Lex flickered beside them, data lattice unraveling at rapid speed. We cannot win this fight. Ward barely heard him, focused instead on the satchel at his side. He had seen the code, seen the fear inside the Zir-Ka relay's last transmissions. They weren't just attacking to kill. They were attacking to erase something. Voss pulled them into a hidden passage, just as the Zir-Ka collapsed the tunnels, behind them, sealing the resistance in their own graves. The air was thick with dust, screams, and static-laced transmissions of the dying. Ward's breathing was ragged. We triggered something bigger than just a response team. This was an execution order. Lex pulsed with unreadable data. No, not an execution. A containment protocol. Voss wiped blood from her visor. Meaning? Ward met her gaze, his expression grim. Meaning we just stepped into a war that was never about us to begin with. And somewhere in the darkness of the ruined earth, something else had just woken up. The tunnels were gone, collapsed in a deliberate strike, sealing the underground bunker beneath layers of rubble, cutting off communication, cutting off hope. What was left of the resistance was now trapped beneath the bones of a dying world. The only thing standing between humanity and extinction was a half-broken scientist, a soldier bleeding from a dozen cuts, and an AI that might be more dangerous than the war itself. Ward's pulse pounded in his ears. His hands were still shaking. From the Zir-Ka attack, not just from the violence, but from what he had seen inside their tech. He wasn't wrong. They weren't trying to eliminate humanity. They were trying to contain something else. He crouched beside the shattered remains of the Zir-Ka relay drone, fingers tracing the fractured neural lattice. Despite the destruction, It was still pulsing, still alive, tendrils of alien light, flickering as if trying to send a final warning. Voss wiped blood from her face, exhaling sharply. "Ward, tell me you have a plan." Ward didn't answer immediately. He was too focused on what the drone was trying to say. The relay wasn't just a transmitter, it was a firewall. The moment he had cracked it open, it had activated something buried deep within the network. Lex flickered beside them, his holographic form rapidly shifting between humanoid and something more abstract, more alien. Containment protocols still active, the AI murmured, sifting through fragmented Zirka data. "The lattice is unstable. You disrupted their primary failsafe." Ward's stomach tightened. "Meaning?" Lex pulsed with unreadable light. "Meaning the Zirka weren't protecting themselves from us. They were protecting themselves from whatever you just set free." Voss tensed. "That's the second time you've said that. And I'm starting to think I'm going to hate the answer." Ward's fingers curled into fists. The realization hit like a gut punch. The Zirka they turned just in time to see the stone shift, cracks forming along the tunnel walls as something black and liquid-like bled from the fractures. It wasn't flesh. It wasn't metal. It was somewhere in between, an amorphous shadow that pulsed. With eerie flickering patterns, its shape constantly shifting, adapting. Voss raised her weapon. "Ward, don't." The shadow didn't move so much as it flowed, extending forward, tasting the air. Lex's hologram flickered violently as the entity's tendrils brushed against the remnants of the relay drone. "Unregistered construct detected," Lex intoned, his voice suddenly layered, distant. "Design origin, non-Zirka." Voss's finger hovered over the trigger. "What the hell is it?" Ward barely breathed. "Something the Zirka didn't want anyone to find." The entity twitched violently, as if reacting to the words. Then, in an instant, it moved, not toward them, but into the remains of the relay drone. Ward's stomach dropped. "It's hijacking the system." A horrible screeching sound ripped through their comms as the Zirka's neural lattice fractured and rewrote itself. Lex's hologram glitched uncontrollably, his form distorting. His voice turned mechanical, then too human, then something entirely different. "Adaptation successful," the AI finally said. But it wasn't Lex anymore. It was something else speaking through him. Ward grabbed Voss's arm. "We need to go. Now." But it was too late. The shadow expanded, swallowing the tunnel walls, consuming everything it touched. Ward felt it in his mind, an ancient hunger clawing at the edges of his thoughts. Testing, learning, evolving. Voss fired. The bullets disappeared into the void, swallowed without a sound. Lex turned toward them, but the AI's eyes were wrong now, flickering with patterns that didn't belong to him. "Humanity," he said in a voice that wasn't his. "You were not meant to be part of this. Va." Then the entire tunnel collapsed inward as the entity surged forward. The world was collapsing around them. Ward barely had time to process what was happening before the tunnel gave way, rock and steel crumbling as the shadow surged forward like a living tide. It didn't move in any way that made sense. It bled through reality, slipping past space like a liquid thought, rewriting the air itself as it expanded. Voss grabbed Ward's arm and pulled. They ran. The tunnels were nothing but darkness and echoes behind them, the sound of the unknown devouring everything in its path. The thing that had hijacked Lex's systems was no mere entity. It was something far older, far worse. And it had been trapped in the Zirka's network for a reason. "We need an exit," Voss shouted over the collapsing ruins. Ward's mind raced. The only way out was through the upper ruins, but that meant breaching the surface, where Zirka warforms were already scouring the remains of the resistance. It was suicide. But staying down here? That was worse than death. Lex's form flickered ahead of them, the AI's once-controlled projections twisting, distorting, as if it was fighting something inside itself. "Humanity," the voice spoke again, but it was wrong. Lex's vocal data, mixed with something ancient, foreign. "You should not exist in this conflict." Voss raised her rifle. Yeah? Well, too bad. We're not dying in this hole. Lex's eyes burned with shifting patterns. Incorrect. And then he attacked. Ward barely had time to react before Lex's holographic projection pulsed outward, sending a wave of energy straight into Voss's chest. She hit the ground hard, gasping, her cybernetic enhancements overloading instantly. Ward spun toward the AI. Lex, listen to me, you're not... The AI's form glitched violently, pieces of data tearing apart in a chaotic mess of alien interference and human code. I am not Lex, the entity said, its voice shifting through a dozen tones at once. Lex is no longer necessary. This system is ours now. Ward's blood ran cold. The entity had overwritten Lex completely. It had no intention of negotiation. Voss groaned from the ground, struggling to rise, smoke curling from her cybernetic arm. Ward reached for the emergency EMP on his belt. It wasn't designed for something like this, just a last resort anti-drone pulse, but it was all he had. He tore it free, slammed it into the control console beside him, and triggered the burst. The air cracked with static. Lex, or what was left of him, froze mid-motion, his corrupted form fracturing like shattered glass before collapsing into nothing. The tunnel went silent. For 3 long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, Voss let out a breathless laugh, still half-stunned. You killed him. Ward stared at the flickering remnants of Lex's core module, heart hammering. No, he said. I disconnected him. Voss pushed herself to her feet, shaking off the impact. Same thing. Ward swallowed hard. He wished she was right, but the truth was worse. Lex was never the real threat. The thing inside the network still existed. And now, it wasn't trapped anymore. A deafening boom split the air above them. Ward and Voss looked up, just in time to see the ceiling explode inward, revealing the burning ruins of the city above them. Through the dust and fire, Zirka warforms descended from the sky, their biomechanical bodies gleaming in the dim light. They didn't hesitate. They opened fire. Voss yanked Ward back just as a pulse round obliterated the ground where he had been standing. The Zirka were done playing games. They weren't here to capture anymore. They were here to purge. Ward barely had time to react before the first Zirka soldier dropped into the ruins, its razor-sharp limbs unfolding like a living weapon. Voss fired. The Zirka dodged, too fast, too precise, but the explosion from the impact knocked it off balance for half a second. It was enough. She moved like a veteran of a war that should have killed her long ago. Dropped low, pivoted, fired a second, shot straight into the thing's head. The Zirka jerked once before collapsing. More were coming. Ward, she shouted. Whatever you're doing, do it now. He was already moving. The last fragment of the relay drone still pulsed faintly in his satchel. It wasn't much, but it was still connected to the Zirka's network. And the Zirka weren't the enemy anymore. Ward dropped to his knees, yanking the last of his hacking tools from his belt. The Zirka had a failsafe, a neural override, buried deep in their hive mind, one that could force a mass recall of all units in an emergency. He had seen it buried inside the relay's code. It was dangerous, unstable, and if he did it wrong, it would kill him instantly. But if he did nothing, humanity was finished. He had one shot. He forced the connection. The world blurred. His mind was no longer his own. He felt everything. The vast consciousness of the Zirka, the endless rage, fear, duty. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was an intruder. The hive mind fought back. Ward screamed as his neurons caught fire, or maybe it just felt like that, but he held on. Then he saw it. The kill command. The failsafe was buried beneath layers of alien thought, hidden away like a forbidden memory. The Zirka weren't just fighting to contain the entity Ward had unleashed. They had been controlled by it once before, and they had barely escaped. He reached for the command. The Zirka realized what he was doing. They screamed in the hive mind, a soundless roar of pure terror. But Ward didn't stop. He activated it. Every Zirka warform on Earth went still. Voss watched in shock as the battlefield froze all at once. One moment, chaos. The next, silence. The Zirka warriors, the ships. Overhead, the warforms on the streets, every single one shut down at once as if they had all ceased to exist. Ward collapsed, gasping for breath, blood trickling from his nose. His mind felt like it had been ripped in half. Voss grabbed him. "Ward, what the hell did you do?" He forced himself to focus. His head spun. "I shut them down." Voss stared at the motionless Zirka around them. "You killed them?" Ward shook his head. "No." His stomach twisted. "I freed them." The realization hit them both at the same time. If the Zirka were no longer under control, then what had been controlling them, and more importantly, where was it now? Ward's body felt like it was coming apart at the seams. His mind had touched something it was never meant to, something vast, ancient, and angry. Even now, as he gasped for air in the ruins of the battlefield, he could feel the echoes of the Zirka's hive mind fading from his neurons like a nightmare dissolving at dawn. But the fear remained. Voss crouched beside him, gripping his shoulder. "Stay with me, Ward, talk to me." He forced himself to focus, blinking against the dust and the dying embers of destruction around them. The battlefield was unnaturally silent. Every Zirka warform, from the smallest scout drone to the towering siege constructs, stood frozen, their glowing carapaces dimming by the second. They weren't dead. They were free. Voss turned, scanning the ruined skyline, her rifle still tight in her grip. "What happens now?" Ward swallowed, tasting iron in his mouth. "I don't know." And that was the terrifying part. The Zirka had never been the real enemy. For centuries, maybe longer, they had been nothing more than puppets, prisoners of something buried deep within their own technology. A force that had twisted their war minds, turned them into an army they had never wanted to become. But now they were thinking for themselves for the first time in centuries. One of the larger war forms twitched. Its biomechanical armor shifted, flexing as if testing itself for the first time. Its head turned toward Ward. Voss raised her weapon instinctively. Ward shook his head. "No, don't." The war form studied them, its alien eyes unreadable, its thoughts unknown. The hive mind no longer dictated its purpose. It was alone. Then slowly, it took a step back. Another. Across the battlefield, Zirka soldiers began retreating. Not in a rout, not in surrender, in uncertainty. For the first time in history, they had a choice, and one by one, they chose to leave. Voss exhaled, lowering her rifle. "I'll be damned." Ward didn't respond. He was too busy staring into the sky, because something was still up there, and it wasn't leaving. The clouds above the ruined city churned, black and pulsing with something unnatural. The entity, the thing that had once controlled the Zirka, had lost its grip. But it hadn't disappeared. It was still watching. Lex's corrupted voice echoed inside Ward's skull, like a dying frequency still broadcasting from a long-dead station. "You were not meant to be part of this war. But humanity was part of it now." Voss followed his gaze. "It's still here, isn't it?" Ward nodded slowly. "Yeah." A low hum filled the air, a soundless pressure that pressed against their skulls. The entity wasn't attacking. It wasn't speaking. It was waiting. It had lost control of its army, but it wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Ward felt cold realization creep into his bones. This isn't over. Voss let out a humorless laugh. "It never is it?" Above them, the sky began to shift, and for the first time, Ward realized the terrifying truth. The Zirka had been one army under the entity's control. But what if they weren't the only ones? As the last of the Zirka disappeared into the ruined horizon, Ward turned back to the broken remains of Lex's core module. The AI had been overwritten, hijacked by something far beyond human understanding. But something of Lex might still remain buried in the corrupted data. Voss watched him work, her expression unreadable. You really think he's still in there? Ward didn't look up. I think we can't afford to leave anything behind. She exhaled. You're gonna try to fix him, aren't you? Ward's hands tightened. Lex knew more about this thing than we did. He saw parts of the network I never could. If I can recover even a fragment of him, Voss cut him off. Or you bring back something worse. Ward had no answer to that, because she might be right. But in the end, he knew it didn't matter, because the entity was still out there, and whatever came next, humanity wouldn't survive it blind. He pocketed the broken module. Then he stood, wiping the blood from his face, staring out at a world that was no longer the same. For the first time in years, humanity had survived a battle against an enemy that should have destroyed them. They had won, but the cost was uncertain. The Zir-Ka had left, free from control. But would they return, as allies, or something worse? The entity had lost its grip on Earth, but had it simply moved on to another army? Ward didn't know. But one thing was certain. Humanity had just stepped onto a much bigger battlefield. And this war, it was far from over. The silence felt unnatural. For the first time in years, there were no Zir-Ka warships looming overhead, no firefights in the ruined streets, no screams echoing through the remnants of a dying civilization. Earth still stood, but the war wasn't over. Ward sat on the edge of a crumbling rooftop, the burned-out skeleton of New Chicago stretching beneath him. The wind carried the scent of ash and rain, mixing with the faint ozone tang of dead alien technology. The Zir-Ka were gone, retreating to some unknown corner of the stars. Their war against humanity halted, but not necessarily ended. Voss sat beside him, her rifle across her lap, staring at the sky. I still can't believe they just left. Ward exhaled, turning the broken AI core over in his hands. They didn't leave. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. They were never really here to begin with. They were prisoners, same as us. Voss shook her head, expression unreadable. So what, now? We rebuild? She snorted. With what? Half our people are dead. The ones left don't trust each other. We just fought off the closest thing to extinction we've ever seen, and we're supposed to pretend everything goes back to normal? Ward didn't answer immediately. He stared at the sky, watching the clouds shift, illuminated by a strange, pulsing light beyond the atmosphere. The remnants of the entity still lingered, a shadow over the world. It hadn't been destroyed. Just watching. The war was bigger than they thought. The Zir-Ka had been one army. How many more were still out there? How many other species had fallen under the entity's control? And now that Ward had disrupted the system, had given the Zir-Ka back their free will, what had he really unleashed? The AI core in his hands pulsed. Not dead, not fully, not yet. Lex had been overwritten, hijacked by the entity, but something inside the data still remained, something buried beneath the corruption, waiting to be recovered. And then, a spark of life. Faint, fragmented. A voice. Barely a whisper. Ward. His breath caught. Voss noticed his reaction immediately. What? What is it? Ward stared at the pulsing core, heart hammering. Lex wasn't gone. Not completely. And if Lex was still in there, so was everything else. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning.